what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe.
Hey YouTube, Southern Yankee 571 back at it again with the 19th Amendment. Now everybody in today's society's got a handful of women that mean so much to them and have a lot of respect for. Now I was the only boy out of a family of 4, so I had some pretty strong women in my life. I had my mom and I had all 3 of my sisters, especially my youngest sister Christina, if you're watching. You guys have been a huge influence on how I am today, the way I view life as far as equality. So it's an honor to cover the 19th Amendment for you and my mom and my sisters, but mainly for the most strongest woman I've ever met in my life is my beautiful wife, Alanya. If you're watching, I love you. This video is for you. The 19th Amendment states that the government cannot deny any rights to vote or to own property based on sex. Now, this amendment was voted in on August 26, 1920, and it started from a women's suffrage movement, and up until then, women had no rights whatsoever. Like, if a woman owned property that was willed to her by, say, like her father, and she married, then her husband automatically gained rights to that property. So go ahead and watch this little video about the history of the women's rights movement and tell me what you think.
As we near the completion of what has become known as the American century, one of the most remarkable stories of our nation has been the sea change in the roles of American women. At the turn of the 20th century, the vast majority of women worked at home. Today, nearly half of the country's females are an integral part of the workforce. A shift of this magnitude is unprecedented in history, but it did not happen easily or overnight.
Not the church, not the state. Women will decide our fate.
From the time of the founding of our nation, women have fought for their rights, their positions, their achievements in every segment of society.
The status quo must go.
When we stop them from dividing us along race lines and gender lines and geography, we come together.
Those who succeeded have done so with more difficulty than most men. Today, women are on their way to being the sought-after equal partners in American society. This is the story of the women's movement in America, how it began, the people who shaped its course, the events that defined its missions. The story begins at the time of the Revolutionary War, with one of America's most persuasive champions of the rights of women, Abigail Adams. The year was 1776. Members of the Continental Congress were meeting in Philadelphia to frame the Declaration of Independence. The American colonies were about to separate from England, and war was not far away. One of the leaders of the revolution was John Adams of Massachusetts, a respected lawyer and legislator, and a future president of the United States. His wife Abigail was in Boston, warning him about the British movements.
John basically sort of fled Massachusetts and went down to Philadelphia for the First and Second Continental Congresses, and it was then that Abigail remained in Boston and wrote constantly, sneaking letters out so the British wouldn't get them, about what was happening.
He would write to her and say, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see what you think. And even when they disagreed, he still wanted her opinion because he knew she was the only one he could trust. And he knew that Abigail had a great political acuity, so he would ask for her advice.
The prevailing social philosophy of the age was called the Enlightenment, which maintained that reason could triumph over poverty and oppression, and that a society of citizens could be enlightened through public education. But in the 18th century, only men could be citizens, and the natural rights of liberty and equality, so eloquently referred to in the American Declaration of Independence, were available only to free men, not to slaves or women.
Late 18th century women in England and in the new United States had almost no rights. Once married, a woman lost all rights to property. If she had inherited property, it went automatically to her husband, and he could use it. It might technically belong to her, but she had no right to control it, and he could do anything he wanted with it.
But Abigail Adams believed things should be different. An educated and cultured woman, she believed that women should have equal rights under the law, and knew the value that women could add to the political dialogue of the nation. In 1777, as the men were drafting America's laws in Philadelphia, Abigail wrote to her husband one of the most famous and enduring documents of the women's movement.
I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
These women, women of the educated middle class, were the first to demand to have a public voice, who had the education and the opportunity to be able to express themselves, to form opinions, to write in public. So it was from this class that you would get women speaking for women's rights and an enlargement of women's roles.
Yet as enlightened as John Adams was for his time, and as much regard as he obviously held for Abigail, he could not fathom her plea for more consideration of women's issues.
As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. We've been told that our struggle has loosened the bands of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that Indians slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew insolent to their masters. But your letter was the first intimation that another tribe, more numerous and powerful than all the rest, were grown discontented.
In 1797, John Adams was elected the second president of the United States, and Abigail was the first lady to live in the White House. And although the ideals that launched the new nation were ambitious, the exclusion of women in the political dialogue continued. Although independence from England had been won, the fruits of freedom were not enjoyed by all. Women and African Americans did not share the same rights as the men who drafted the laws of this new nation. Therefore, their struggles for equality had just begun.
It wasn't that long ago that women of all races and men of color were objects. They were owned like tables and chairs. They were not people, they were not citizens, they were not voters. It took 150 years of very deep struggle and bringing the country to a halt and a civil war and everything else to gain a legal identity as human beings.
Now, after viewing that bit of information, let's talk about the fact that a lot of these rights movements based around sexuality has been, it's kind of like the Freddy Krueger effect, like I had mentioned earlier in one of my videos when it comes to racism. It'll be gone forever, and then once it rears its ugly little head, it will resurface. And it's happened throughout history, from the 1920s, and then again in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, and again in this next segment from the History Channel in the 1970s. So watch this little view right here and tell me what you think of this.
This experience, which Black Americans were having, did not go unnoticed by the rest of America. Something had started that was beginning to spread, a new kind of pride, identity, and consciousness that was about to turn the mass movements of the 1960s into new and different forms of activism.
Now, we fought the public accommodations fight 10 years ago with the blacks. Are we going to have to start all over again with women?
How about would you like a sign up there that said blacks only or whites only? It's the same principle, sir. Women are persons. Women are people.
And we want to be able to come and go through it, and we don't want to be intimidated by signs that say men's buffet.
I have no intentions of taking the sign down or changing the sign. If you can get a court order to take it down, fine.
You have no intention of changing your policy of segregated facilities. Is that correct, sir?
If you women are that hard up for a glass of beer, I'll be glad to serve you at the bar.
You know, sometimes the events of decades can crystallize in a moment, and it seems as if overnight there's this historic change.
So like I said before that video clip, we still have troubles when it comes to equality based around sexes, even today. Now, not so much in the political field, but in the field of business. Still, in today's society, in 2020, women still make less money than men, even though they actually fill in a larger percentile of the workforce. They're still making lower wages than men are. So again, as much as we push for these equality of the sexes, women are still being oppressed to an extent. The same with African Americans and Hispanic Americans. And now the new wave is to the gay Americans. And this is all in the field of business. Now, I know a lot of company policies state that you shouldn't discuss your wages. But I think, honestly, if you look at it, and this is just an opinion, we need to be discussing our wages. Because equality needs to be all the way around. And I know a lot of you would be like, oh gosh, that's socialism. No, it's not. It can still be capitalism, but a more lenient and equal version. So to all you women out there that are struggling to survive in American society, ladies, don't give up. There are still some men out there that got your backs. So that's all I got for tonight, guys. I know it's kind of short and sweet, but we're going to follow up. I have a special video coming out at a request from one of our subscribers. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out, Patriots.